Hey guys, I'm Sam Luce here at NA Studios. Today I want to take a look at the compressor. I want to take a look at why we compress, the controls of a compressor, how we can utilize them to get the best result, and really dig deep into what these controls actually do to the audio and how you can use them. Let's check it out. So the first thing to say is that I'm using the compressor within Logic Pro. You don't have to be using Logic Pro to follow along with this. Any compressor is going to achieve very similar results, especially with regard to the attack, release, and the controls are still going to do the exact same thing, regardless of which compressor you're using. So first off, just to kind of give you an overview of the controls and what it is exactly that they do, I'm going to focus on 5 key controls here: threshold, ratio, attack, release, and makeup gain. We're going to go into a few more in-depth functions as well, but those are the main kind of 5 that we're going to use to sculpt our sound. Now I've got a drum beat here just behind this compressor, and this is just an Apple loop, and then I've added to it using some kicks and some snares so that we can really drive home what this compressor is doing. Adding more low end to the kick is going to really help to kind of bolster these ideas, and adding some more snap to the snare is going to really give you a better idea of what's going on. So first off, what I'm going to do is just play the track, and it's on a loop, and I'm going to start moving some controls, and you're going to start seeing what's going on. But first of all, I want to take this meter away from the kind of standard VU meter and move it on to graph, because this is going to be a really good way of actually demonstrating the gain reduction, demonstrating exactly what's happening. So gain reduction is when it's actually turning stuff down, essentially, when it's changing the output relative to the input, which is essentially what a compressor is doing. When we're compressing, we're altering the dynamic range of something. So we're taking the loud sections and we're turning those down. And then in turn, using the makeup gain, we're turning everything else up below it. So when we have a dynamic range that's up here, and then we have the quiet parts that are down here, essentially what we're doing is we're squeezing that and we're making the dynamic range less. So we do that using these 5 controls. Let's just play the track, and I'm going to turn some knobs and see what's going on. So first off, I'm going to deal with the ratio, and this is exactly how much compression is taking place. We're going to go into that in depth in a moment. When I turn this ratio knob, you're not actually going to see any gain reduction happening because I need to bring a threshold down for that to happen. But I'm just going to set my ratio to around 4:1, and we're going to discuss that in a moment. Okay, so let's start turning our threshold down, and we'll start to see some gain reduction happening. Before and after. So you can hear that that's getting pretty squashed at the moment. We're really leveling out those peaks, and we're making it so the drums aren't actually punching through as much as they were before. And this is kind of the opposite of what we want to do with the compressor. We can emphasize the attack. We can make it so that drums have more punch, so that vocals are more leveled. But generally we're dealing with the overall dynamics of a sound, the peak and the sustain of that initial transient or the overall audio. The reason why this is chopping things off too much is because the attack control, as you can see, is all the way down. So let's just define a few terms now. So attack and release, we're going to look at those first because those are actually so important, and they're kind of the ones that are spoken about after threshold and ratio. But in order to understand threshold and ratio, you need to understand what attack and release do. So attack and release govern how quickly compression takes place and how quickly the sound comes back to no compression after compression has taken place. So attack is like the ramp up to actually starting to achieve that full compression, and release is the ramp down afterwards. So the attack, if we have that set at essentially 0 at the moment, then we're compressing straight away. We're allowing none of that initial transient of the drum to poke through. So that's why it sounds so squashed, because we're not letting any of that transient come through. So as I start to turn this attack knob, you're going to start to hear the transient, the initial hit of the kick and snare really start to come through. And that's what we're doing with this attack control, where we're governing how much of the initial hit we're actually allowing to come through. So let's start by turning that. So around there, we're actually hearing the initial hit of the kick and the snare start to come through. I'll bring that down to 0 again and then bring it up to around 70 so you can kind of hear the difference. Really squashed. It's just starting to let the audio breathe a touch, just allowing it to come through just a little bit. And you can actually see that on the graph as well. If I bring this attack all the way down again, you'll see it's basically a straight line coming down. Here, here, this is where we're actually coming down. If we bring that attack up, we're starting to see more of a kind of a ramp. It's not a direct down movement anymore. It's more of a gentle movement. So the attack is how long it takes for full compression to be achieved. It's not how long it takes to be compressed. That's a common misconception. It's how long it takes to achieve that full compression. And this is kind of a ramp. This is sort of a gradient. It will start compressing straight away, but the attack is how long it takes to achieve full compression. So let's leave this at relatively long. Let's leave this at somewhere over 100 milliseconds. Let's just take the compressor out and then in again and listen to the difference. So it's really making a difference in that low end. It's starting to tighten that bottom end, and this is good. This is what we want. The bottom end before was allowed free, and it was kind of moving around a bit in a bit of a untamable way. So by using this compressor, we've just helped to rein that in a touch. Let's listen again. Bottom end's a bit blobby. Okay, cool. Let's move on to this release. So this is kind of the opposite of the attack. This is how long it takes to go back to normal after the compression has taken place. And you're going to hear this on the tails, on the ring of the snare, for example. If I bring this up, then we're going to hear the ring of the tail of that snare kind of still be compressed. But as I bring it all the way down, we're going to hear that ring come back up again, and we'll discuss why. So the ring gets much louder. It's quieter. We're getting more of that ring. And that's because the release is short enough for the compression to have finished before that ring is really present. So that ring is allowed to come back up to the original uncompressed volume in enough time so that it kind of squeezes up a little bit. Remember, when we're dealing with compression, we're in general terms dealing with kind of volume. We're dealing with how much these peaks are being taken down by in a volume sense. So if we bring those peaks down, then the level is going to come down. As it's allowed to release back up again, then the level is going to come back up again. So that's why we're hearing those tails. The release is long enough that it's allowing those tails to come back up again, and we're achieving that kind of pumping, kind of squashing effect. Let's set these controls so that we've got a nice kind of movement with the attack and release, and then we're going to take it off and bring it on again, and we're going to hear the difference. Nice long tail. Let's go off and on. So you can hear that it's only really affecting the real peaks, the kick and the snare, the initial hits, and then in kind of relative terms, the ring is allowed to kind of come back up again. If I bring these kick and snares up, just the individual kick and snares, we're going to see more gain reduction because we're applying more into the compressor. So more compression there. Bring it back down again. And we're seeing less. We're looking at this graph here, look, more compression. So this is our standard level. As I bring this kick and snare up, we're going to see more. Loads there. So the reason for that is because of our threshold. So the threshold is the point at which it starts compressing. You saw as I turned that kick and snare up into the compressor, we started compressing more. That's because we're giving more signal into that threshold. So the threshold is, in this instance, at minus 12.5. So that's a constant. That threshold is always there. That is the level at which compression starts taking place. That's what a threshold is. As soon as we turn more audio up into that compressor, we're allowing more audio to reach that threshold. Therefore, it's going to be compressing more. So we're shoving more into the compressor. So because of the controls that we've set, we're actually going to be achieving more gain reduction, more downward movement. So the threshold is the level at which compression takes place. And if we bring this control down, then we're going to start seeing more compression because we're lowering the point at which we want compression to start. If we have the threshold up really high, then it's only the very, very loudest peaks that are going to be compressed. You'll see that on the graph here. Let's bring it down until we're just achieving a small amount of white here. So we're only really getting the main kick drums that are being compressed. As we bring this threshold down, we're starting to compress more. And that compression sound is getting far more obvious. We're hearing much more of a slap, much more of an attack. If we go really extreme, then the attack and release controls are going to matter far more because they're really governing that into the compressor and out of the compressor. If there's more compression taking place, then they're going to be more important. So now we're going to hear even more. If I bring that attack down, then we're going to hear a real kind of splat of the transient. As I bring that up, we're just getting a bit of breathing space. Really killing it. We're just allowing the kick and snare to come through there. And again, the release control is going to be more effective here as well. Compared to... And this release is an important one because you can see here, it's not actually coming all the way up to no compression because the release is too long. We're at 1,000 milliseconds, so we're at a second. So it's not allowing the compressor time to recover before it has to start compressing again. So you'll see that on the graph here, it's not allowing it to come all the way back up again. But if we bring this down, we're allowing it time to release. And that's why these attack and release are really important. If you have your release setting too long, then it's not going to be allowed to uncompress before the next hit starts, the next hit that breaches that threshold. So it's really important to kind of marry these attack and release constants together, make it so that you've got enough of the initial hit coming through in the attack section that you're not completely killing the transient, you're not getting that kind of splat sound. And then in the release, you want to allow the release to be short enough that it's going to allow the compressor to stop compressing before the next hit starts. So the ratio here we've got set to 4:1. If I bring this all the way down to like 1:1, then we're essentially achieving no compression. Okay, no compression happening here at all. And the ratio is exactly that, a ratio of what comes in to what comes out. If the ratio is 1:1, then it means that regardless of your threshold, your attack, your release, anything, then the same thing is going to come out as came in. As soon as we turn that up to 2:1, again, it's a ratio of 2:1. So for anything that passes that threshold, the volume is essentially going to be halved. So if we get 10 dB that passes that threshold, then only 5 dB is going to come out because it's been halved. If we have 9 dB that comes through and we have a ratio of 3:1, then we're going to have a third as much come through. So 9 dB passes the threshold, but only 3 dB is actually allowed to pass that threshold. So you can see as that ratio goes up, the amount of compression that actually happens, the amount of compression that takes place gets considerably greater. At 4:1, 5:1, you can even go up to like 10:1 or 20:1. At that point, it's generally considered to be limiting. Now, limiting is often spoken about, and what a limiter really is, in terms of a brick wall limiter that you might put at the end of a mix, it's just a compressor with a very high ratio and a very fast attack time. If you've got the attack time super fast and the ratio super high, then it means that it's just going to be a brick wall. It's not allowing anything to come through at all. So if I bring this ratio control up to something crazy like 30:1, you can see on this graph it's almost just completely leveling out, and we'll see far more gain reduction here. So for every 30 dB that passes the threshold, it's only allowing 1 dB to pass through, which is a fairly large ratio. As I bring that down, you're going to start to hear the compression kind of get a little bit less. Compared to that. So 1.3 to 1 we end up there on the ratio. That's really gentle. That's the kind of thing that you would normally apply for something like mastering. So there's a balance here between this threshold and ratio, and there's kind of two ways of looking at it. If you have your threshold down really low, so it's going to be compressing a lot of the peaks that are passing that threshold. If we've got our threshold down at, say, -40, then an awful lot of the actual audio is going to be passing that threshold, but we've got the ratio down low. So it means although a lot of it is actually passing that threshold, it's not going to be compressed by too much. Nowhere near as much as if we had the ratio up really high. You can see exactly how much is coming through there. So the balancing act, if you have your threshold super low, then you want your ratio nice and low as well. Or another way of doing it would be to keep your threshold quite high, so not that many peaks are coming through, but to keep that ratio quite high as well. So the few peaks that are coming through, it's really clamping down on those transients. And that's kind of two different ways of looking at it. The first, with a low ratio and low threshold, may be useful in a mastering context, or if there's an instrument that you really want to clamp down on the signal of, then having a high threshold or higher threshold and a high ratio is going to be the way to look at it. And finally, this makeup gain is after all the compression has taken place, how much we bring this up by. So this is like a level matching kind of thing. If you're applying gain reduction, you're essentially bringing down the volume of those peaks. So you need to bring up the level of the whole thing overall. If we take a listen to this before and after, then we're going to hear that the compressed version is maybe just a touch quieter because we're shaving off some of those peaks. That's louder. Compressed version slightly quieter. So we need to apply some makeup gain. So that's a way of making up that signal that we lost, making up that volume that we lost by applying the compression, and we're making that up afterwards, and we're giving a little bit more signal. I hope that's been useful to you, just as a general overview of what these controls do and how they're going to affect your audio. If you were to try these on drums, you're going to get a very different effect than if you were to try them on vocals. They do different things depending on the source material that you're applying them to, but these are kind of some best practices for how these controls actually function and what they can do for your audio. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again soon. Take care.